So we're delighted to welcome some great heavy hitters from our own state. We've got some great treasures to be unearthed. And so one party we want to introduce, if you've not already been introduced, well, you're going to hear from him in just a moment, and I'll let him riff and ad-lib. He's going to be talking about infectious diseases for the next 40 minutes. So we've got Chuck Marone of Strong Towns, and I was touching base with one of our venerable members. What would be the best way to tee him up? And he gave me a pithy soundbite, which I'm going to botch. But it was in the vein of Chuck is bringing Catholic social teaching, and you can polish this up when I'm done. Kind of bringing Catholic social teaching to the, maybe we'll say the practical import on the local society and local city. So we're delighted to have you here, Chuck. Thanks for making the trek down from Brainerd.
Yes, thank you. I actually say to friends, not really in public, but that we're smuggling Catholic social teaching into the secular world. So that's the way that I would talk about it. Thank you. It's very nice to be here, and it's very humbling to be able to speak to you about this. I don't get to do this kind of thing very often. I do a lot of public speaking, but it is all about Strong Towns issues in Strong Towns kind of forums, community meetings, conferences, a lot of conferences. I was in Des Moines this week speaking at a conference, meeting with city officials and that kind of thing. So it is a pleasure and a treat for me to be able to think about and talk about and share ideas in this kind of setting with people who we share a common framework and a common understanding of the world. So thank you for the invitation. I wanted to start by talking about a trip I made 26 years ago. So I'm 52, so it's half my life ago. I got invited to go to Italy. So as a 26-year-old man, I was part of a Rotary exchange program. I was invited to go. They sent 4 professionals or 5 professionals from Italy to our district up in the Brainerd area, and then likewise had an exchange where we went to Italy. And it was a fascinating trip. In true Italian fashion, they weren't ready for us. No, the trip actually fell apart after 2 weeks. It was kind of a disaster on their end. The team that they sent here had a fantastic time, but it was supposed to be a professional exchange. Did not exactly work that way. But I had this like sub agenda myself, because I had never traveled outside the country. I had never traveled to Italy. And as a Catholic, as someone who had been brought up Catholic and lived a Catholic life, and my Catholicism was important to me, it was an excitement that I had to go and live amongst Catholics. I mean, Italy is a 98% Catholic country. It's a country where there's like almost a church on every block, seemingly. What is this going to be like to be around people who live their Catholicism so fully and deeply and kind of, immersed in it, as opposed to like one tiny part of a larger secular society? And, not to demean the Italians in any way, but it was, let's just say, very underwhelming. There are certainly the icons of Catholicism everywhere, and there certainly are the churches and the different reminders that you're in a Catholic country are quite frequently. But what I found and what I experienced was that the practice of Catholicism was not kind of what I thought it would be when I went there. I remember one instance where I went to church in a number of different places. I was actually lucky enough or fortunate enough to be able to go to church at St. Peter's at the Vatican. And I remember sitting there, and there was a cardinal doing Mass. And of course, I'm not sure if it was in Latin or Italian. Both of my Latin and Italian are not good enough to discern between the two. And so I'm sitting there in Mass, and I'm trying to follow along and understand where we're at. And the woman next to me, and this was in 2000, so younger people, we used to not have cell phones. I don't know if you know this, but this was like the very early days of cell phones. I did not have one with me at the time. But the woman next to me's cell phone rang, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing and so disruptive. And I feel kind of bad for her, forgetting to shut her phone off or whatever. She picks up her phone and she goes, pronto, which is their, like when they answer the phone, they say pronto, which is ready. Like, I'm ready to talk, pronto. And then she had a conversation with someone. And of course, I'm sitting there and I'm kind of mortified. Like, this is the most solemn place, the most serious mass. Like, what are we doing? And in my mind, it seemed kind of a joyous and gay conversation, but I'm thinking maybe there was some family issue or something I'm not aware of. Okay, whatever. We're sitting there and we're about to go up for communion and the phone rings again. And again, she's like, pronto, had a, nice conversation as we're getting up and walking up. And it just occurred to me like how casual and almost transactional that our faith can become at times. And the juxtaposition between the place we're in and the way we practiced there was very jarring to me. I got back, and a few years later, I got a call from a group in Brooklyn, New York, Williamsburg neighborhood. It actually left a message for me that my secretary put on my desk. This guy named Moshe Landau, Hasidic Jew, wants you to build him a new city. Please call, and there's a number. And I'm an engineer and a planner from like central Minnesota. What in the world are we talking about? So I called this guy and ended up going out there because, I'm completely unqualified to build someone a new city, but I thought there's something here to learn. And I got to spend a few days and then subsequent trips and experiences with the Hasidic in Brooklyn, New York. Now, the Hasidic live in some of the highest density housing in the US. Williamsburg is a largely Hasidic neighborhood. The family that I got to know really well lived in a one-bedroom apartment with 5 kids. Their living room also becomes the dining room, also becomes the bedroom for the children during the day. So the furniture is all like fold up and modular, right? They have, of course, they're deeply practice their faith. And so, they have their kosher meals, and one day is meat and one day is dairy, and those dishes are all stored in separate places in an apartment like the size of my dorm room, it felt like, in college. I remember I was I got invited to their apartment, and we were there, and the family that I got to know had 2 kids in a playpen in this living room / dining room / bedroom. And they were kind of having a difficult time and carrying on a little bit. And Moshe said, I'm going to help out with this kid and with that. And I said, well, there's 5, like, those are who are these kids? Oh, there's a family that is having marital problems. And we are taking their kids for a while so they can have some time to work them out together. And this was a thing that I ran into over and over and over. They live in this, they called it a pressure cooker because of the density, because of like all the people in one place. And what they wanted me to do, this was kind of crazy. I'll just tell you what they wanted. It's not important to the story. But what they wanted me to do was help them build a new city in rural Kansas. They were going to move 50,000 Jews from Brooklyn to the middle of Kansas. Let me just give you the math. If you move 50,000 Jews to Kansas, you take over the county. Like you would be, there was like 5,000 people living in this county, so they would have run the whole thing. And they wanted me to help them build a city. It ultimately fell apart for a number of reasons. First of all, it was an insane idea. But second of all, one of the big things that didn't work that I was not aware of, that they made me aware of, was, and this is going to be their term, not my term, but they were having trouble getting Jew infrastructure there. Again, their term, not my term. But if you delve into that term, what it was a connection to their rabbi, the ability to practice their faith, all of the things that they needed provision from kosher foods to, we can go on and on and on about the things that were central to the practice of their lives. The thing that astounded me so much about the Hasidic in my time there was how even in a place that seemed hostile in many ways to what I'm just going to call like normal human life. You know, think in our like affluent terms of literally like choosing to live in a place that is not cheap, that is not, you know, but choosing to live in a place where your living room would be your dining room, would be your kid's bedroom, and not one kid, but 5 kids, and 2 kids that you took in just to help another family. That was a very normal situation for them. And for them, it was difficult in some ways and an annoyance in some ways and what have you, but they never talked about it that way. What they talked about the whole time was how they were practicing their faith, how their faith and their practice was an important thing that, in a sense, they had put first, and all of these other things that might be annoyances or inconveniences or hardships or what have you were central to the practice of their faith. I wanted to start with these 2 stories of the Italy and the Hasidic because, you know, as Catholics, as a Catholic, I have long struggled to live the life that I feel like I've been called to live or want to live or strive to live. And when I look at the models, you know, to me, there was something in my mind that said, when I get to Italy, I will witness people who it's easier to live the life that I would like to live than the struggles that I have here. You know, I live out in growing up, I lived on a farm in rural Baxter. I now live on a 5-acre lot with my wife at the time. We've got to drive 15 miles to get to church. You don't just like passively do that. You know, it will be interesting to be in Italy. And while you certainly had like the configuration for a Catholic lifestyle, there was something that was missing. When I went to Brooklyn and I lived for a few days and had some other experiences follow up with that with the Hasidic, here were people who I think struggled against the conditions that they were given, but had in a sense dedicated themselves to a certain approach. And let's be clear, a certain approach that was really difficult to do in New York. I mean, they're not a popular group in New York, right? But yet their commitment to their way of life was paramount. I said that Strong Towns is a lot about smuggling Catholic social teaching into the secular world. I have spent a lot of my time trying to help cities adapt and change and grow stronger, grow more resilient, and grow more human in a sense. The core insights of Strong Towns really go to the way that we build our cities, the way we construct our places, and the underlying rationale for why we do that, which is often stuff that we take for granted. As a civil engineer, as a young planner, I got an undergraduate degree from the University of Minnesota in civil engineering. I worked for 5 years, got my license, went back and got a master's degree from the University of Minnesota in urban and regional planning from the Humphrey School. In all of these situations, I had never been called upon to question the underlying assumptions of our development pattern. It just like was the way it is. But I want to give you a brief history of this so you can think like a Strong Towns person and you can see kind of some of the challenges that for us, I think as Catholics are especially poignant, that we have, in a sense, come to accept because it is literally the way things are today. If we go back to Edina, we go back to Minneapolis, St. Paul, we go back to Brainerd, prior to the Great Depression, what you would have experienced is a development pattern that was hyper local. And by hyper local, I mean what we talk about in Strong Towns is an incremental development pattern. The idea that place was paramount. You can go up to my city, which I know very well, obviously, less than yours. But you know, we had neighborhoods that were built around the church. We had neighborhoods that were built around different institutions. You can go to the small towns up where I live, all the saints, St. Peter, and you can see, like, when you come over the ridge, there's the church in the middle of town, and the town was literally like built around it, and the streets kind of lined up on it as like the central place. This is how we built neighborhoods, and whether it was a Catholic neighborhood or a Lutheran neighborhood or a Jewish neighborhood or what have you, these institutions were things that we built kind of incrementally around in ways that were very hyper-local, from the way you would finance a house at a local bank with a 50% down payment and a short term, to the way we would finance infrastructure and build our city and decide where we were going to expand and how. It was all very bottom-up, very incremental. In the Great Depression, and we could look at the industrialization of America and the movement of people to cities and the rise of the automobile and all that. I feel like the dividing line, or the one we should get our minds around and keep with us, is the shift between pre-Great Depression economics and post-war economics. And I bring that up because every place around the world has an automobile. Every place around the world has modern construction techniques. Nobody builds the way that we do, or at least not as their core. They do as a luxury good. As time has gone on, you can go to, I just got back from the UK. You can go to the UK and you see their cities are not like our cities, but on the edge, they've got a little bit of a Americanization they've done, right, as their like affluent extension. But what we did was fundamentally different. And the dividing line is really that Great Depression, World War II period. Leading into the Depression, we had the Roaring '20s. We had this period of great economic growth, kind of the blow-off top of our industrialization period, if you want to think of it like that. And then we hit the Great Depression, and the economics of our country changed. I remember when my grandfather was still alive. He was a Marine at the end of World War II. He was actually the first group into Nagasaki at the end of the war. That gives you a sense of his age. So he grew up largely during the Great Depression. When he was young, his mother passed away, and he wound up moving in with neighbors. He told me that he felt very fortunate and lucky because he was better off than most during the Depression. The neighbors allowed him to live in the barn, and they'd sleep in the barn, and they would feed him, and then he worked the farm. We all live in Minnesota. You can imagine what a 1930s barn would have been like in February. When my grandpa tells me that he felt more fortunate than other people, I took that to mean this was hard in a way we can't comprehend. With that as like a backdrop for what the Great Depression was, we are all taught in economist world that the thing that got us out of the Great Depression was World War II, which is, let's look at this for a moment through a Catholic lens and realize like how warped that thinking is. We were in economic hardship, and the thing that got us back to our glory days and we got our mojo back and like we're back as a country is a global war where tens of millions of people died, where our brothers and sisters were asked to go overseas and to kill and to die, where lots of other people who were of working age were drafted into the industries of war to build things that had no utility beyond being blown up, ships, planes, munitions, what have you. And that this was considered economically the height of success because the metrics went in the right direction. Unemployment went down, GDP went up. This should be a signal to us that we live in a world dominated by economists and economic thinking. But as the war was coming to an end, the advisors around the president started to, in a sense, freak out. They said, there's a memo that is kind of famous in economic circles. Paul Samuelson wrote to FDR. And in the memo, he says, if the war were to end, there would be the greatest period of the economic dislocation that any economy has ever seen. In other words, if we win this war and like it's over, and we bring home these troops and we shut down these industries, we're just going to slide right back into the depths of the Great Depression. There's nothing really different about the economy in 1945 as there was in 1935. So, all this employment and all the great things we're getting from war, economically speaking, will go away once the war is over. Now, we all live in their future, right? We know that that didn't happen. What actually happened was we had the greatest boom economically in global history. A boom that we've, a 20-year, 25-year economic boom that we have been trying to repeat ever since. From a land use standpoint, from an engineer, planner standpoint, what we did is we came back from the war and we turned our cities into machines of growth. We engineered economic growth by building a new version of America. And so instead of cities that grew incrementally over time, in a sense, would thicken up, would grow out, would grow up, would change, not necessarily slowly, they could change very rapidly, but always incrementally, always with one hand on a supporting beam and another like reaching out to something new. What we said is that we're going to turn our cities into the thing that replaces war spending. We're going to make them grow very, very, very quickly. And so things like interstate highway construction, the subsidization of infrastructure, the building out of housing, massive housing subsidies and massive commercial real estate subsidies and a whole secondary market in order to squeeze more and more liquidity into how we build, allowed our cities to expand very, very rapidly. I like to point out that Brainerd, Minnesota, at the end of World War II was around 13,500 people. Today, Brainerd, Minnesota, my hometown, is around 13,500 people. But it's 10 times the area. It's 10 times the amount of pipe, 10 times the amount of road, 10 times the amount of area to provide sewer and water and police protection and fire protection and all the other things that we do. We've been able to grow our cities very, very, very quickly, generate a lot of transactions in our economy, generate a lot of growth, the way we measure growth in terms of transactions. But there has been, and this is kind of the core Strong Towns insight, there has been a huge trade-off for us locally. There's been a huge trade-off for us within our cities. I called this early on a Ponzi scheme. And, I think there's a sense that we have about Ponzi schemes that they are all nefarious. And I actually don't think that that is true. I actually think if you study Ponzi schemes, if you look at Bernie Madoff, for example, very few people who find themselves in Ponzi schemes actually set out to do a Ponzi scheme. Bernie Madoff, kind of the famous one most recently, actually just fudged some numbers in his books so that it looked like he was doing better than he thought, thinking next year I'll make it up. Right? Like next year I'll make it up. And then the next year he couldn't make it up. And so he fudged it a little more and a little more and a little more. And by the time you get out a couple decades, you so kind of corrupted yourself inch by inch by inch along the way that doing the Ponzi scheme becomes the thing you're doing. When we look at cities, what we see is that when a developer comes in and will build a new development out on the edge for us, put in 40 new homes, pay for the sewer and the water, build all the buildings, build all the commercial infrastructure, build all the stuff that's needed. As a city, that transaction feels very much like a cash sugar high for us. We didn't have to spend hardly anything. We get all this new growth. We get the permit fees. We get the sewer and water hookup fees. Now we get the new property taxes. And what we do as a community is we say, well, we'll take over and maintain that road. We'll take over and maintain that pipe. We'll take over and provide those services that are needed. But we all understand how this works, right? If you buy a new house, how much maintenance work do you have? Not very much, right? You know, the doors are all on right, the housing siding is all fine, the sidewalks are brand new, the roof is all good. But you go out 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, what happens? All that bill starts to come due. If you buy a house that's 30 years old, you're buying a house that needs maintenance. If you're buying a house that's brand new, you don't. When the city takes over that new infrastructure, for the first 5 years, there's nothing to do. For the first 10 years, there's nothing to do. That 15-year-old sidewalk, that 20-year-old pipe doesn't really need any work. And so from a cash flow standpoint, we feel very, very, very rich. You watch cities that grow explosively like this. I mean, right now in our region, I'm not as familiar with the South Metro. Eden Prairie is not this, but it would be the next one out. But like as we go further north, you know, the Maple Grove was it for a long time, and now it's kind of Rogers and Otsego and all that. You know, these are the places where the sun is shining and it's easy to make hay today, right? Like you can just open up the ground and developers will come in and they'll build it, and then all of a sudden you've got all this cash flow. And you see them building the fancy city hall and the fancy fire department and the police station and spending all this money on parks because they're like now the rich place to be. The problem is when you build a place all at once, you build it to a finished state, not incrementally growing over time, but you build it and it's done. What happens is you get this echo effect. 25 years later, everybody's roof was built at the same time. Everybody's roof has the same lifespan. Everybody's roof fails at the same time. Everybody's siding needs to be replaced and repaired at the same time. Everybody's sidewalk goes bad at the same time. Everybody's appliances start to need to be replaced at the same time. The city infrastructure needs maintenance at the same time. And now all of a sudden what you have is all of the bills come due at the same time while the neighborhood is going into decline. What do we do to arrest this decline? Well, in prior versions of human history, we didn't build to a finished state. We built incrementally in a framework that would, in a sense, like renew itself over time. As we grew, we thickened up. The middle of the city became more valuable. As we grew out, the neighborhoods would become more valuable. Think of like a bell curve. Out on the edge is your startup land. In the middle is your kind of more expensive land. That rising land value, when things start to decline and fail and fall apart, would create this natural redevelopment pressure that would keep the city renewing, keep the city kind of, you know, growing. You didn't get hyper growth, but you got enough growth combined with stability to make it all work. When we go on and we grow very quickly, neighborhood, 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 and then they start to fail, the city responds in a very kind of easy to understand for us today and kind of predictable way. The first thing they do is they try to grow more, because growth is the thing that gives you the free cash flow. Growth is the thing that is going to give you the money to fix the thing that's now falling apart. And so you see our cities being obsessed with growth, obsessed with the next project, the next thing. And you actually can go to City Hall today and see how our cities have oriented themselves vertically around what's the money we can get from the federal government? What's the money that we can get from the state? What's the money that we can get from a developer to come in and build something new so that we can grow? You also see cities raising taxes, cutting core services, and doing things that begin over time to feel predatory. We are going to really, really regulate this poor neighborhood to keep it from dropping any further, right? We're going to try to put regulatory system in place to create a floor on the decline. This is a series of transactions that are not only very dehumanizing, but contrary to what prosperity looks like for us on the ground. I have given, in most of my talks, I will put up a picture of Taco John's in Brainerd and the block right next door to it. Because the block right next door to it used to look like what the Taco John's block used to look like. A bunch of little tiny shops not really high-end stuff, the kind of stuff that doesn't look, there's literally like a liquor store, a pawn shop, a bankruptcy attorney, kind of the, a tattoo parlor, kind of the things that we think of as like the bottom feeding economic development. But you have one block of that, and then the next block over you have the Taco John's, which used to look like that, but we labeled it blight, we tore it down, we got it redeveloped, and now we've got the Taco John's. This is a transaction that in every dimension that we tend to value today looks like success. We got rid of blight. We got rid of the tattoo parlor, we got rid of that nasty stuff, and now we've got something that meets our zoning codes, our building codes, has ample amount of parking, has a double drive-through. We even got a little bit of bike walk infrastructure in, and we got a weed like stormwater area that the environmental people were happy about. We've got all the stuff that like we say is what success today looks like. The problem is that Taco John's, that block, the whole block together has a value of $600,000. And that old blighted junky rundown block has a value of $1.1 million. They're the same size, they're the same area, they cost the city the same amount of money, but the city's actually making 78% more tax revenue on that old block. That's a really compelling story. I actually have a bunch of maps where I show like this is not a one-off anomaly. This is the pattern we see repeated over and over again. But I want to pause on that Taco John's block for a second, because when we look at the Taco John's, what we're looking at is the efficiency mindset kind of made real. The idea that cities can be reduced not to human transactions, but to economic financial transactions. Taco John's is really efficient. They put a lot of people through the drive-through every day. They, have ample parking. It is an investment that can be easily sold off on a secondary market, securitized, bundled up. This is the kind of height of efficiency in our current mindset of how we build cities. If you look at that old and blighted block, it is inefficient. It is like, in every metric that we've come to value, it doesn't work. But if we ask things like, how many employees do each of these have? That old blighted rundown block has like double the number of employees. How many local owners does it have? Well, Taco John's has no local ownership. The old and blighted block had like 8 different local businesses with local owners. Where do those people bank? Who do those people use for their accounting work? Who do those people use for their attorney? Where do those people advertise? When we go through and we ask all these questions, what we see is that one block is part of an economic ecosystem that is driving the community. And the other block is part of an economic system that is driving inefficiency, but is actually taking wealth and capacity out of the community. I want to give you one other look at this in a way that I don't generally talk about in my secular talks. We've got a church bulletin that comes out every week, and the last page of the church bulletin is all the people who are supporting advertising in the back of the church bulletin. It's a nice way to solicit a donation for the church, what have you. Taco John's is not on that back page. Neither is, go through your litany, Dunkin' Donuts, Taco Bell, like they're not there. It's not what they do. It's not where they advertise. Who's there on the back page? About half of those businesses in the old and blighted block. A bunch of other little things in the city. We have this measurement called the 4th of July measurement. How many people are going to be in your 4th of July parade? It's never the highly efficient, highly tuned businesses that are there, right? It's always the other ones. It's always the ones that have a human connection. I said when you go into City Hall, you get a vertical component to it. At Strong Towns, we talk about taking City Hall and making it more horizontal. And we actually have given this thing we call the 4-step process as the kind of highest form of public investment. Right now, when we think of public investment, we think of the city going out and spending $5 million widening this road or $8 million putting sewer and water in over here, or millions of dollars trying to get this new business to open up or move in or what have you. And when we look at and study those investments, we see that yes, they create a lot of transactions. Yes, if you're the state or the federal government, you measure that as GDP growth. But if you're the local government, those transactions are almost always negative returning. If not immediately negative returning, then negative returning over the long term. Here's what's not negative returning. Our 4-step process. Step number 1, go out and humbly observe where people struggle. Where are people having a difficult time using the city as we have built it? Step number 2, ask yourself, what is the next smallest thing we can do today to address that struggle? Not to solve it permanently, not to make it something that we never have to worry about again, but what is the thing that we can do with the materials we have on hand to alleviate that struggle and make it a little bit easier for people to live in this community? Step number 3 then, do that thing. Do it right now. And then step number 4, repeat the process over and over and over. This is how we take a system that is sensitive to changes in federal grant requirements, changes in state legislation, what the interest rates are, what development community wants, and make it a community that is sensitive to where are people having a difficult time using what we have built? Where are the connections in our community not as sound as they should be? Where are people having a tough time today? And let me give you the Strong Towns punchline, because I think we all in this room share an understanding of the human dimension of this, that this is actually like a more moral system, a more just system, a more, I think, human way of approaching things. But let me give you the punchline. This is actually like the best financial way to approach things. These are the lowest cost, highest financial returning investments that we can make. This is how we take our cities, which are being ground into insolvency, and actually turn them around and make them more functioning, more profitable, less predatory, more service-oriented, and financially sound and resilient. I want to close by talking a little bit about my church, St. Francis Catholic Church. When I was a little kid, I used to sit next to my great-great-grandparents. And so this has, been there a long, long time. My grandfather's name is on a plaque in the back of the church as one of the, parishioners who went and fought in World War II. There's a little thing in the back. My family, I grew up on a farm that was homesteaded by my great-great-grandparents, so I'm very rooted in Brainerd. I was told years ago, and I've seen this written in other places, and then I've seen it contradicted, so I'm not a Greek speaker, so I can't say definitively, but I was told years ago that the word parish comes from 2 Greek words mashed together that mean to dwell aside. It's something like that, but the idea that was being conveyed to me was that a parish is not the church. It is not the people. It is literally the people living in communion with the church, and with a very strong emphasis on proximity and location. It was maybe 15 years ago, there was a murder across the street from my church. So St. Francis Church, and then there's a school right next to it. They're all one kind of evolving campus. But right across from the front entrance of the school was a murder. And I don't mean a murder like someone was randomly killed. I mean, there was a drug deal and someone went in and shot 2 people in the back of the head. Like a horrific murder across the street from the school front door. The reaction of my priests and my church was to go to City Hall and demand changes. Demand that more regulation be put in place, more enforcement be put in place, more police protection be put in place, that we get this building torn down and redeveloped, that we were harder on the landlords who were renting it out. I get that instinct because that instinct is our instinct. It's kind of like our social instinct. It is in a sense like what we've been taught is a acceptable community response. But it depressed me. And I'm going to say some things, and I'm going to try to say them with as much humility as I can, because I'm not going to pretend that I either have the answer or know what's right or have invested the time and energy. I feel very conflicted about my own parish because I've been called to do this Strong Towns work, and I feel like it's very important. I have not devoted as much time and energy to my own parish. But the thing that made me sad is that we never stopped and asked what our role was in the decline of the neighborhood. We never asked, why doesn't a Catholic own that building and care for it with love? Why does our neighborhood around a church, suffer from decline and neglect while we all live very far away and drive in? Why is the development and the investments that we make in the neighborhood buying up homes so that we can expand our parking? In a sense, devaluing all the buildings around us and making them kind of ripe places for slumlords. We spend a lot of time in my parish talking about all of the different things inside the church building. We have had sermons about the different cloth that we would lay on the altar and the way the altar is actually configured and why that's important, and where the statues sit and why that is important for our practice of our faith, and why we have the aisles configured as they are, and the stained glass windows and what they mean. And I feel like this is all like deeply beautiful and a huge part of our practice and building our Catholic faith and helping us kind of immerse ourselves in Catholic teaching. But then you walk out the door and you're faced with concrete, cement, air conditioning units, and weeds in the grass. There's an entire neighborhood here that is literally our parish, what we are called to steward and be part of. And when we talk about our Catholic faith, it's one thing to show it to the person next to you in the pew or the person behind you when we share a sign of peace. It's a completely other thing to show it to the stranger living in the house next door, the person who lives 2 blocks away. When we want to shine a light, take the basket off of the light and allow it to be seen, it's harder to do when it's only happening inside the church itself. The challenge that I think we face is to take our values and let them live through the cities that we build. And it is hard to do that in a secular society. We do value efficiency more than we value stability. We do value, as a society, the next transaction more than we value making good, prosperous communities. Like, I get that. I don't think, let me say that a different way. I don't think we as a society value that. I think the systems we've set up kind of push that, and we don't really question them all that much. It actually kind of runs counter to our values. But none of us in this room are going to change the Federal Reserve. None of us in this room are going to change the Wall Street system. None of us in this room are going to change who is president and who's in Congress and what values comes out through all that. We're not even going to change what happens at our own state legislature. But here's what we as Catholics can change tomorrow. We can change the way that we interact with the neighborhood around us. We can show these places the love that we practice towards each other here. And some of those people will be Catholic and some of those people will not be Catholic, but they will know us through our deeds. And when we do this, we sit in this room and we glorify God through our kind of holding sacred this space. But if we recognize that that space like emanates out from here, there's a block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks, 6 blocks. We genuflect in front of the altar. We can actually have that same mentality 6 blocks from here because it's the same God in the same place, emanating out. This is what I feel like as Catholics we can do right now. That would be, if we want to just think of it in secular terms, a demonstration project of what Catholic love should look like. Caring for a place. And here's the cool thing. If we do this, I actually think we are merely demonstrating what most of society wants to see. This is not something where we care for the neighborhood around us, make it a more inviting place, build more homes here, allow more people to live here, make it more walkable, allow a family to thrive in this neighborhood without having to have 2 cars, change their economics, allow us to have a structure that encourages family formation and support the way the Hasidim did in Brooklyn. I think we do these things and we project Catholic love and Catholic values into them. I think what we will find is that there's a huge segment of our society, I would say the vast overwhelming majority of our society, actually wants to live in that way. And they might not identify it as Catholic, and they might not ever want to become Catholic, but they will want to become more like the Catholic social teaching, the justice that we talk about, the way that we think is a very human way to live in communion with God. Thank you so much for having me here today. This has been really fun for me to think through these thoughts in this way and share them with you, and I appreciate all the positive smiles and feedback. We say at Strong Towns, keep doing what you can to build a strong town. That is not a call to do everything, it's a call to do what you can. So as Catholics, let's just do what we can to make the world better. Thank you so much.